listening to yet another episode of Smash the Bug. Jesse and I are here as your hosts today, and we're going to talk about a subject that we've obviously not covered. This podcast is, you'd say, is in its infancy still, and we are really excited about the places this is going. But historically speaking, Jesse and I have talked about the challenges we've worked through with projects that we are building or debugging or that sort of thing. But today, our focus is going to be just a little different. Jesse, what are we going to talk about?
Well, you could say debugging the person, ourselves, but specifically something you would recognize as burnout.
Burnout.
What happens with burnout? What do we do with burnout? Well, what is burnout?
Well, yeah, so we're going to talk about that. But of course, I have to always put my preamble hint in here. If you have not already, click that bell icon. If you're watching this on YouTube, great place to watch it, by the way. It's under the Swift Otter channel on YouTube. If you prefer to listen to this in your ears, using one of those fancy white Apple AirPod deals or whatever your earbud is of choice, or these big old honking big headphones, whatever you'd like to listen to those on, we are found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. If you like to listen to podcasts, you'll find us there. So without further ado, let's talk about this kind of gnarly subject of burnout. I know I've been there, Jesse. I'm guessing you have too.
Absolutely. And it comes and goes. It's just like I can enter its ups and downs, and so sometimes it'll start coming in, and I'll reassess what am I doing, and get back on track. Yeah.
Well, so I think it's an important topic, and because left unchecked, left undealt with, it can take you to some not good places, and
absolutely, it can distract you from your work altogether.
Which could ultimately lead to, for example, a job change or even a career change that wasn't necessary in the first place. I get it if it's necessary. But again, left improperly dealt with, it can cause maybe some damage.
Yeah, because what I want to talk about is the reasons for the burnout and some of the things that could be maybe precursors or signs that we can recognize in doing that. But it would be really unfortunate to change careers or jobs or something extreme like that if the problem can be solved on a day-to-day basis.
Exactly. Absolutely. And ultimately, neither of us would say we are psychologists in any stretch of the imagination, but maybe experience gives us a little bit progress in that direction, you might say. But ultimately, burnout could lead to depression, and that needs other treatment that is to be dealt with at that point. But hopefully, there's some of our suggestions. This conversation will touch on some areas that maybe hopefully stops it way before it gets to a point of a serious problem like that. But either way, the key caveat I want to say right now is be open with others. Be out there with others. Keeping burnout internal, not telling anyone about it, and possibly the progression and the steps that I could take could lead to some real damage to yourself and certainly those that are around you. And that's the last thing any of us would want to see. So make sure to be open, to get help as it is needed. So
that's a really great thought. I kind of want to jump in too and get your thoughts on what is burnout, because this is I think it's a great place to start. Like, there's days when work is hard, but that's not necessarily burnout.
No.
How would you distinguish between what burnout is and what it isn't?
I think burnout, just put generally speaking, at least in my experience, for example, I'm working on this project for a long period of time. I put in a ton of hours, and a ton of hours every week. And there comes to be a point, and I find, at least for me, it's a trigger that something goes wrong. There's a mess up, there's a mistake, and it just kind of like shuts me down. It's like all motivation to finish this project out completely stops. I don't feel like continuing. I have no motivation to get this project finished. And as I'm talking about this, I'm kind of literally reliving. Like, I've had several of these projects, and it's just, you just literally, I groan. It's like, oh, seriously, do we literally have to touch this again?
That so resonates with me. With me. Yeah, I think you're right in recognizing that change from one point, it being exciting and interesting, to then this like stark contrast to that where nothing is going well and nothing feels good about the project.
And I think burnout then, maybe we're blurring the lines here, because ultimately I think burnout would maybe be attached to our work in general. So this one project has so taken over everything that everything else that we touch for whoever we're working for starts just really turning to mush. It doesn't feel, there's no enjoyment, there's no satisfaction that happens as a result of this. And to be frank, there's been some times, so obviously we have the agency side, the working for merchants, and then on the other hand, we have the training stuff. And for me, there was quite a number of, I pretty much work every Saturday. And so but there was for a time, I was even working a lot of evenings on this too. And I hit a point of burnout. I think 2019 was particularly, end of 2019 was particularly bad. Actually, there was a time in 2018 as well. 2019, I don't know about 2020 as much. And 2021's actually been pretty good. It's overwhelming. So I think hopefully we're learning to deal with it just a little bit better. But yeah, you hit those points and it's just like, especially if there's nobody driving you on it. Like on the training side, back then there was no set goals or mile markers. It was just like, boy, I don't have to do this, so I really just don't feel like pushing on this. And it's a very discouraging feeling ultimately at that point too.
Yeah, I'm just curious how many hours you think you might have been putting in at that point.
Oh, it was probably pushing 60 hours a week.
Okay, I was wondering about that. I've heard some numbers that say that after 40 to 50 hours, someone's productivity can actually start going down after that point, doing more time than that. And I think that's another interesting perspective is just how much like each of us are actually capable of or feasibly capable of.
Because, and that's really interesting, Jesse, because you think about, there's called the difference between if we were to work with our hands all day, every day versus sitting here at the computer, and it's sometimes frustrating. You look at some of these people and they're working 12-hour days and they still seem like they're doing okay at it. Like that they're not like they're killing themselves. A lot of for sure my grandparents, I would say there's a lot of that they were doing, both on my wife's side and my side. They did just fine. 12 hours a day really wasn't that big of a deal, but for some reason, and I think there are those people who can in our industry do 12 hours a day or more, but it's, at least for me, there is a limit. So I think one thing is recognizing our limits in this.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that is where this conversation about what can we do to work away from burnout starts. In just simply evaluating how much time are we on the computer and everything like that. And again, everybody's different. There's not just to say like 50 hours or 60 hours. It's just like, that's a line in the sand and everybody's going to be different.
That's right.
On what specific number starts to go over that tipping point where we're less effective and where we're more likely to burn out.
Yes, absolutely. Let's go back to these symptoms of burnout, just so that we're all on the same page. Another one is just getting out of my bed, getting ready for the day, looking forward to my work. It's just a drag, and I've had that. It's like, again, do I really have to go to work? I think you're seeing some similarities and symptoms here, but it adds up and it adds to the discouragement. It's kind of like a compounding effect instead of compounding interest, which is a great thing. This is compounding towards problems, and that's a really bad thing.
Yeah, and another thing that comes to mind is the desire to take shortcuts. So instead of being willing to step back and just like we've talked about on this podcast so many times, being willing to step back and reevaluate, check out what is the root of the problem. What I am inclined to do when I'm getting burned out is just look for the Band-Aid. I don't care about anything else. I'm just looking to get that pull request up and get that ticket marked as done.
Yeah, which ultimately leads to less satisfactory work. And that just, again, that compounds the problems. It does not solve any problems at all. I think one thing I have really struggled with, and we'll talk a bit more about the vaccine for this, is when I am burned out, I don't take the breaks that I should because I am feeling unmotivated, and then I feel guilty about feeling unmotivated. And that means I need to work harder because I am unmotivated. And if I take a break, I feel guilty that I'm not getting the work done that I should. You see how this goes? And again, it's this compounding thing. It's like this logarithmic scale that it's hard to escape out of at that point.
Yeah, that's really true. And I agree with that. And I think that with the rise of remote working, there's a little bit less of someone seeing their team member at a desk and being like, oh yeah, they're working because I can see what's on their screen. Now being remote, it's that much easier to get off track, to get distracted and things like that. And so with burnout, then that becomes more natural. And then those break times, whatever they are harder to take.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, haven't been there. I'm sure a lot of you have been there. Maybe some of you are currently there, and my heart goes out to you. It is not a fun place to be. It's difficult, and
there's no like one switch solution, one thing that fixes the problem. It's tough and it's worth working on, but it's not just one of those things you take a pill and it's fixed.
Yes. Here's another one. I promise we will be getting to the solutions in just a minute. But being the owner of Swift Otter, now we're up to a team of 9 developers. I have struggled with this idea that I'm the most senior on the team, and thus the team's going to fall apart without me. So in other words, I got to work all the harder, which I've been seeing more and more. That's a management issue. And ultimately that's a self-inflicted issue. As I choose or allow other people to have more responsibility, it's amazing what they do. And there's those disappointments, of course, but I'm just amazed over and over again. And Jesse is a shining example of this, of like what he does to keep operations going here on a day-to-day basis is phenomenal. And that has, of all things, I mean, and there's been a lot of things that have contributed to managing burnout, but that right there has been one thing that has tremendously helped, just letting go of some of these things that other people do so much better at. I'm not the best at everything. So yeah, you have thoughts about that one, Jesse?
No, that's a good point. And it can be hard, especially depending on where I think a person is at in the organization or on a team, to let things go. And there's this two-sided aspect of, one is, yes, giving responsibility, but then also holding accountable. Yes. And both things take learning and are things we could probably talk about more at length. Mm-hmm. But that is a really good point in being willing to farm things out or give work to other people. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah. I think we should talk about some specific scenarios that might influence burnout. And then at the same point, some points as far as what we have found is effective to dealing with that. Before I do, as we were just talking, one thought I have had, and this has helped me also significantly, is my general perspective. It's easy to get pigeonholed or tunnel visioned on a certain perspective. Wow, I just hate working on this project. There's so many problems with it. The problems never go away. But on the flip side, recognizing the blessings that we have. And when things look dismal or disappointing or frustrating, sometimes it helps to look out and say, wait, especially in light of 2020, right? We have a job. We're grateful for that. Might not be the exact work that I like. I'm providing for my family. There's points of discomfort in this process, but at least the basic necessities, and I hope in your case as well, my friends, but the basic necessities are met. Is it exactly how I like it? But no, but I don't think almost anything in life will be exactly how I like it. And so that big picture perspective, and it takes a friend often to remind me of this, and Jesse's been great with that too. That big picture perspective can completely realign the vision. And it's like, wow, I actually have a lot of things to be grateful for. And again, I know that's not always the solution to burnout, but at least making sure we start into this process with the correct perspective can really, really help.
I think that's a great point, because burnout is, I think, most importantly, a feeling, or at least for most of us, that's the case. Like, it's the feeling that we have about a project or work at some level and things like that. And so realigning those feelings, if we can in that regard, is a really, really good thing to do. And so much of that has to do with perspective and the things that we're telling ourselves and all of that sort of, what you say, self-talk that people talk about some.
Exactly. And I guess you might say my comment of that is just channeling my unlicensed inner layman counselor. But, but I think it's true. And it's really helped me. Just, again, realigning my perspective has made a huge difference for me. Jesse.
That's great.
What's your thoughts about, let's run through some specific scenarios that have been influential to both of us. And
some things that at least for me would cause burnout or lead on that path to burnout. I think one of the things, and there's a bunch of them, and I don't think any one of them in particular is going to be like, oh yeah, that's going to cause burnout. But one of the things that comes to mind is changing requirements for a project. I know one of the most demoralizing things that I can do is throw code away, even though sometimes that's the right thing to do. Sometimes the code was maybe just not great in the first place, or in order to keep the code base clean going forwards, I have to throw code away. But it's still like, I hate it. Yeah. And I think if there was very much of that, that would be one of the things that would take me that step towards burnout, to where I did all this work, and then I'm ultimately digging a ditch just to fill it back in.
Well, and like you mentioned, like you're in this point that we have written down here about the client changing requirements, that can be incredibly frustrating. But the one other aspect of that is for those of us who are more in management as well, maybe doing code reviews. I made this mistake yesterday, 2 days ago. Today's Thursday. Maybe was it 2 days ago? I can't remember. Yesterday. There's my developer and me trying to get very specific here. But a member of our team went through or had a pull request, and I made some comments on that. We talked back and forth, and we agreed on a change on that. And ultimately, later in the day, we ended up having another conversation about it, related but not the same thing. And I realized my advice or my suggestions in the morning, in the morning, was pushing this developer in the wrong direction. And that's demoralizing. And so it's a good reminder for me to recognize that, to take very seriously changes that we want to be made, have a good reason for those, and to make sure I have thought fully through that, because there was a couple things I had missed. They were fully there. They were obvious. It was my deal. I had missed it. But that's demoralizing when we want something changed and it really didn't need to be changed in the first place.
And that's another great point, is paying attention when on the phone with somebody else. It's so easy when on the phone to basically tune out or not really pay attention to what the team member's talking about.
Yes, meetings. Don't we love meetings? I hate meetings. I really do.
But sometimes those can be important details that we work through at that point. And if one checks out and then is like, that's exactly what you should do.
Yes.
That can cause problems later on too, and be demoralizing. And I think this is one of those things where there's not like as a lot of things, there's not like a clear fix for this. But I think there's a couple things that we as developers can do to decrease this likelihood of having to throw code away. And I think one of the things is making clear on the requirements before we start.
Absolutely.
This is somewhat management, right, as it comes to client requirements, but sometimes it's the way that management communicates to us developers that can also be a problem too. It just depends on where in the chain that link is.
But it's also developers, I think, you as a developer should be able to push back on those requirements. If you think it's just downright dumb, like why would you want something like this? It's good to push back on it. Of course, graciously, don't say it's dumb, but at least push back graciously. And I think this is ultimately a way to fight burnout, because as you push back and have well-reasoned arguments, the merchant, your management team, or whoever it is, they're going to see that, wow, that you are being thoughtful about this, and your opinion does matter. And so even if it's shot down, then hopefully through the course of time, your opinion will become more respected. Jesse, I need to take a quick break here. I am noticing on your glasses, you got a piece of fuzz right on that side over there. And every time I look at you, I see that piece of fuzz.
So that's probably cottonwood from our big tree in the backyard.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
That I spent most of the day working outside, and that tree produces a enormous amount of cottonwood. It's a mess, but
so
I still like the tree.
Yeah, it's a good. Cottonwood trees are nice trees.
Of course, when I take my glasses off, I can't see nothing.
I think you got it. I think. Nope, it's still there. Let's see.
Please go ahead.
There you go. It's gone.
All right.
That's funny. Anyways. Okay. Here's another thing that definitely leads to burnout. So this first one is demoralizing. Demoralization, if that's the term, I think it is. Being demoralized.
That's now
being demoralized. Okay. Thank you.
Demoralization is now a term.
Okay. Good.
You just coined that.
Being demoralized very much leads to burnout, but this one certainly does. I was talking to some developers while ago. They were working on a project for a merchant for 3 years.
Oh,
and
without shipping it?
Without shipping it, yeah.
Wow.
And it never saw the light of day, i.e. production. And they were burned out. They were done. They were sick of this.
I can imagine why.
And I think this is a challenge, maybe more of a challenge for developers who are working for a merchant, right? You're working on one website all the time. And I think this is something that maybe those of you who are working at for a merchant would face this a little bit more. But it's applicable to everyone. Those of us that work at agencies too, and we're working on 5-10 projects at a time. Yeah,
and that is when you get too siloed into something and you're just working on one thing day after day after day, and there's no variety there. As a matter of fact, I was talking with a dentist last night who said that he was frustrated with having to do the same things over and over again, and therefore
dentist experience burnout too.
Yes, dentist experience.
Wow.
He said he could fill teeth in it. He could do fixed cavities in his sleep, and he just got tired of it, and so he started branching out and learning other skills. That way, he could provide better care to his clients by providing a wider array of options to them, but also for himself that learning was interesting to him, and then the application of being able to get in there and fix some interesting problems. He told some bizarre stories, like where they can replace like someone's entire top set of teeth, or like your teeth, instead of getting dentures or something like that, like do implants all the way around and 3D print this guide and all this sort of wild stuff.
It's crazy. It's crazy. I think I know that dentist too. And it's like, the amount of technology that goes into the amount of you developers that have made that possible is phenomenal. And a lot of years of sweat and research and development to get to that place. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So I think the way to kind of work around that a little bit is to take on some side projects. And I don't mean like paid side projects necessarily, as much as like, hey, I want to learn React. Maybe you're a JavaScript developer that hasn't touched it before. So you jump in and you learn React. Or maybe you learn Symfony. If you're focused on the back end, you take up this new framework, this new skill set of some kind, and jump in there. Or maybe it's a different language altogether. Mm-hmm. Maybe jumping into Swift or Go or something like that challenges you to think outside of the box. And then doing that, and then actually self-promoting to your manager and saying, hey, I now have this skill that I can apply to these projects. Yes. And I think you'll find variety with that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think I've seen that in my life. Back in, was it 2018 when I started doing more of this the training aspects of this on the Swift Otter side, it was frustrating to me that I was giving advice to my merchants, but I had no opportunity to vet these out myself. Like they were good ideas, but I had no opportunities to do that. And I know the context here is slightly different, but that is one of the reasons I launched the training side of this. Obviously, I had the idea, but building it out as more or less of a business, it gave me an avenue to take these ideas that I'm learning in that business side and actually share them with the merchants with whom we are working. And that very same thing applies. Like, for example, like Jesse mentioned Symfony. Maybe you're working on Magento. Maybe you're working on Shopware. Well, Shopware extends Symfony, but learning Laravel when you're working with Shopware, that sort of thing, because there is so many great ideas that are found in these other frameworks, other languages, learning a functional language and taking those concepts and applying it back into PHP will give you breaths of fresh air. They've given it to me. Well, for example, Jesse and I, for a long time, we went to the PHP user group. May it rest in peace, thanks to COVID, the actual in-person one. And it was so good. There was things I learned from that I took back and I applied into the code that we were writing. And it was those breaths of fresh air that gave great inspiration. And so with that, I think we're going to wrap up this episode. There's so much more we can talk about, and we were running out of time a little bit. This took a little bit longer than I thought it was going to take us. So we're going to push it off into part 2 and maybe a part 3, because one thing we want to talk about is from a manager's perspective. So watching for the signs of burnout with your team, making sure that you are motivating them, that sort of thing. So there's a lot more to talk about with this concept of burnout. We could probably dedicate way too many episodes to it just because of how real it is, how much we run into it. So
it's a big deal. And we want to talk about things that are not related to our job that can influence burnout in our job as well.
It does. All of it. It all plays together. And so, yeah, there's a ton to talk about. And so, again, if you are struggling with burnout, reach out to us. You email Jesse at SwiftOtter, Joseph at SwiftOtter. We're not licensed counselors by any stretch of the imagination, but we fought through this. We've been through this ourselves, and it's a sticky place to be. It's a difficult place to be. And again, my heart goes out to you. Our hearts go out to you if you are currently in that position. And at least we'll lend you a listening ear. Write us with your story, and we would want to hear it. And we might even share it, anonymously, of course. But especially those of you who have been onto the other side, it's important to talk about. Without, I guess, further ado, whatever you want to say there, we're going to wrap it up today. And make sure you have subscribed to this podcast. We'll be talking about burnout in future episodes, probably not the next one. I love talking about the challenges that we're facing, and I hope it's inspiring to you all. It was a great pleasure being with you all. Stay cognizant of burnout. Make sure to be ahead of that so it does not bite you. It was good talking with you. We will talk to you next time.